Hey guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to dive into the wonderful world of limited liability companies and whether you should hold your investment real estate in one of those babies. I brought in attorney Preston Knight. First off, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Toby. Happy to be here.
Hey, and he's going to dive right on in and show us whether or not a type of property and type of activities should be using some sort of structure or not, and so, might be surprised at which ones should and which ones shouldn't. And sharing some experiences he's had with his clientele as well. So I'm just going to get out of the way and say, Preston, take it from here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Toby. And yeah, we're going to jump into the world. Should you hold your real estate investment in an LLC or maybe not? And I hope to share some stories that are relevant to everyone so they can kind of see when and where they need to use those LLCs and when to not to, because there's always a time and place. So to jump right in, I'm going to answer a question with a question, just like attorneys do, right? So the first question is, does your real estate have a business purpose? I see people coming all the time to me with structures set up by other attorneys where they use an LLC where they probably shouldn't, or they don't use an LLC when they should. The first question you got to ask, though, is it a business purpose or not? And that's the big thing. So if you are going to use real estate for a business, you're going to rent it, you're going to flip it, you're going to buy and hold, then it should be in an LLC. It needs to be in some sort of business structure. But if you're going to have real estate that maybe you're going to live in, or a second home, or you're going to let family live in it and not charge them rent, then maybe it shouldn't be in an LLC because that's a personal use, right? And that's really the big question. That's where you got to start. You have to determine, is it going to be business or is it going to be personal use? But we want to establish that separation. And the big thing with that is early in my investing career, before I was an attorney, I was in the military. And I had a mentor that came to me and said, hey, Preston, you should buy some real estate. It's really cheap. This is like 2010, 2011. And I was like, great. Sounds wonderful. So I went out, I found a property. It was a HUD home. It was like $103,000. You can't find property like that here in Utah anymore, but $103,000. So we bought it. So we bought the property. And then my mentor's like, you need to put it into an LLC. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. Again, before I was an attorney, right? So I started Googling it just like everybody does. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have this rental property. I probably should have some protection. What does an LLC do? Well, the business structure removes it from your name and separates it from you. So you're not operating as a sole proprietor, which is really, really important. I found that out the hard way by not doing it the right way initially. And I see that all the time. So what are some business purposes that you might find out there for real estate? Well, the obvious one is long-term rental real estate, right? So a lot of us are in the game to purchase as many doors as we can to really establish that income coming in every single month. You get that mailbox, you see the check. I just deposited mine yesterday. Fantastic, right? So that's a long term. If you take title for a short-term property, that should be in an LLC as well, because it's a business. You're running it like a hotel. It's really, really important. If you're going to do a fix and flip, and a lot of people kind of avoid putting that flip into a business structure because they're like, I'm not going to hold it long term. But a fix and flip is probably one of the most important real estate investments you can use an LLC for. So you want to put that property that you purchased, maybe at auction, maybe you bought it from someone that was distressed and it's kind of run down and you're going to flip it. You need to put that inside an LLC, a legal entity, to protect yourself from it. This is one where I have another client that came to me a few months ago, and she was doing a fix and flip. She sold the property. I'm like, okay, great. Wonderful. You sold the property. Did you shut down the LLC? She's like, I absolutely did. I'm like, perfect. You did everything right. And then she tells me in the same story, like, hey, but Preston, they're coming after me to replace a water heater and to fix some flooding that happened because the water heater exploded. And I'm like, hey, you know what? There's nothing to sue. You separated that property from you, so they can't come after you because you had it in your LLC. So that was a great structure for you. She, being a really nice person, really wanted to help him out. But I'm like, hey, you know what? They don't have a legal standing. The LLC that you had was separate from you. as opposed to holding it in your own name. If she held that property in her own name, she's liable. She's on the hook. Those people can come back and sue her. So you have that business purpose of fix and flip, definitely put that inside an LLC. Other things that are out there, a buy and hold. If your intent is to buy and hold property for long-term appreciation, maybe you put that into an LLC just to protect yourself from that property. Because even if it's empty land, somebody walking across it, or if there's undiscovered trespassers or an established path across the land where you should know that people are there and you don't take remedial actions, you could be on the hook. So you want to hold that in an LLC as well. And then a syndication, if you're the syndication sponsor, it definitely needs to be in an entity. And you can even hold your passive interest in a syndication in a legal entity. So these are all business purposes that you can really separate yourself from the liability of your real estate and put it into that legal entity. Now, what do we not want to put real estate into an LLC? Your personal residence. I see this all the time, Toby, all the time. People come to me, hey, I had this attorney and they've set up an LLC for me. Like, great, what's in it? Well, I have my home and my car and my boat and all this personal property in an LLC. That's not what it's for. It's not designed. The limited liability company is a business structure. It's not designed to hold all of those personal assets. It's not meant for that. And most courts will look at that and say, hey, you know what? It's all personal stuff inside of it. We're going to completely ignore it. And then they're going to have extra scrutiny on what you actually have as business assets inside of LLCs. So your home, your beach house, if you're using it and not renting it out, if you own a beach house and it's a short-term rental and you're renting it out, great. But if it's your beach house that you spend all summer in, that should not be in an LLC. Your cabin in the woods should not be an LLC. Your hunting cabin, not an LLC. So those are just a few examples of what should go in, what should not. Now, super important. A story came to me about a real estate investor. She was a well-established investor. She had over 30 properties. All of these properties were completely paid off. Because they were paid off, she didn't feel like she had to carry insurance. She had a structure set up by an attorney who knew what they were doing, but she never deeded the properties into the structure. She ended up having a catastrophic loss. One of the houses burnt down and something very bad happened to somebody inside that house. Now, because she had the legal structure but never deeded the properties into it, she didn't take advantage of the protections of that legal structure, and all the properties were in her name, so she was on the hook for everything. All of her properties were at risk, plus all of her other personal assets, just because she never finished all the process to set up and take advantage of those protections for her business assets.
Preston, that's fantastic. There's a couple questions that we get a lot, and I'll just ask you how you deal with it. So first off, somebody says, well, but I was told to use like a living trust or a land trust or something for my home or for a second property. Are you saying don't use any of those vehicles to hold title?
No, because a living trust or a land trust are not business entities. So those are actually great. A living trust or a land trust set up with a living trust to avoid probate is a wonderful setup. It's not really, because it's not a business trust or a business entity.
Yeah, you're just putting and changing titles so it doesn't get tied up in a probate process, or in some cases, you just want to get your name off of it. Another one is, for the person out there who's freaking out right now, if you have an LLC and you put your home in an LLC, doesn't mean that it's destroying everything like your homestead and your 121 exclusion and capital gain exclusion. It just depends on how it's treated from a tax standpoint. If it's disregarded, you're not completely toast. Other question for you, Preston, is there's a lot of folks out there that say just get good insurance. What do you say to those folks?
Yeah, good insurance is another piece of the puzzle, but it's not the piece. Insurance companies, as we all know, are in the business of minimizing their payouts. And not everything is covered. Maybe there's mold issues or there's a rider in your insurance that says we don't cover X and that's what happened. So insurance companies, while it is very important and a very important piece of the puzzle, is not the piece. And the legal entity will provide you protection. So if the worst happens.
Let's talk about the worst that could happen. Let's say that you're a successful doctor and you decide you're going to buy some rental real estate, and they come and let's say they're in your neck of the woods in Utah and they buy a piece of property. Let's say it's $100,000. That we go back to 2011 and you're getting great deals again. What's the worst that could happen to somebody who invests in a piece of property? Let's say a rental property that's worth 100 grand. Let's say it's worth 50 grand. What's the worst thing that could happen to them?
If it's held in an LLC?
Just their name.
So if it's held just in their name, if they get a judgment for more than the insurance coverage and more than the value of the property, they can go after your personal assets. Actually, I worked a mediation for someone who was found liable, and they had significant insurance, but the plaintiff was coming after additional funds above and beyond the insurance. And this was a solid middle-class family. And what they were asking for was going to put them into bankruptcy. Like it really is one of those things where if you have all of those assets in your own name and you're found liable, it could really, really damage you and put you into bankruptcy.
Yeah, so a doctor is not going to go bankrupt. Maybe they're making really good money every year, so they could just end up getting garnished the next 10, 20, 30 years. You can always renew a judgment. They just keep collecting against you over and over and over again. So that LLC just creates a nice little layer to protect you so that you can walk away from the liability. I think you made a good example of the person who was flipping, of the client who was flipping. And you need to be able to walk away and wash your hands of a transaction, because 3 or 4 years from now, you could have somebody knocking on your door saying, hey, my water heater exploded. And you're saying, that was a long time ago. I don't own this property anymore. Yeah, but you knew or should have known. I've seen this with termites. I've seen this with environmental issues. If you don't have the ability to stop that liability, they're going to concoct stuff. I've seen it going back 10, 15 years on chain of title issues where they just sue everybody that's in that chain of title and say, you knew or should have known. And they're coming after everybody, trying to extort judgments out of them and get them to settle for things. And if you want to be able to walk away from it, you just say, hey, LLC, close it down. It's done. Liability's done. You can pound sand all day long. You're not going to get anything out of me, because there's a lot of folks that are predatory, or they get the ambulance chasing attorney who's going to shake everybody down. You just don't need that. You don't need that in your life. Let's say that I am just, hey, I'm just getting started and I'm buying properties, and I buy 3 or 4 rental properties. So I put each one in an LLC, or is it okay just to throw them all into one LLC?
Yeah, that's a great question. It comes up all the time. I think for those that are starting out, it is the most important to set those up in separate LLCs. Just because if you put all 3 of them into one bucket, into one LLC, all 3 of them are at risk from each other. And as a starting out investor, if you lose 3 out of 3 rental properties, you're starting from scratch. So it's better to lose one if it comes to that. 33% is better than 100% when we're talking about loss.
Yeah, and when they sue, they're not just looking for the value of the property; they're looking for that revenue stream. And so, a lot of times, we think of our rental properties, and we think, oh, it's a couple $100,000 property; it's making $2,000 a month. Who cares? If they sue me, so they take that. I'm going to throw them all. I have 5 properties in one. They're looking at those as revenue streams. They're looking at each one of those as so much dollars per month, and they want that. You got to isolate it. You got to isolate it so you can say, here's the maximum amount I'm willing to lose, and you can hand it off. There's all sorts of different ideas out there for properties. There's land trust, there's statutory trust, there's irrevocable trust, there's LLCs. Ultimately, what's the philosophy you use when you're working with a client to determine what's appropriate?
Yeah, so I like to see where they are and where they're going. And I think it's really important that it's not a one size fits all. All of those things, the LLC, the statutory trust, the land trust, even irrevocable trust, they might be applicable to what you're doing, but there's just no one size fits all. So I think it's important to sit down with somebody who's willing to look at your current situation and where you want to go to come up with the best solution for you.
then I'll make this really easy. If you're somebody out there and you're thinking, how do I know what's appropriate for me? Just type in strategy in the comment section and we'll reach out to you for a free session. Or you can click on a link and you can absolutely talk to Preston or one of his brethren here who can help you determine what's appropriate for you and look at your situation. Preston, thanks for coming in and sharing with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Toby. It's been my pleasure.